Well, it's a pretty strange place, isn't it, Darren, where neither Sir Keir Starmer, that I've just been talking about, nor Boris Johnson can admit that only women have a cervix.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
quite. Yeah.
the wokeness of those two is absurd. And I think that and just drives millions of people absolutely bonkers.
Hello and welcome to Reasoned UK with me, Darren Grimes. We're the channel that asks you to think more and follow less. And one topic I've spent a fair bit of thinking about over recent months has been the options that we face at the ballot box. In Sir Keir Starmer, we've got the architect of Labour's second referendum campaign to deny us of our vote, to strip us of our hard-fought-for democratic freedoms and liberties, and frankly, a man who is about as inspiring as a wet weekend. And then in Boris Johnson, I'm afraid to say there isn't much there beyond plans for wind turbines, inflation, energy bills going sky high, and your taxes being hiked. If that's Brexit boosterism and bullish Boris, then I'd hate to see what the opposite looks like. So basically, folks, I'm screaming out for an alternative. I don't know about you. And I'm absolutely delighted to say I'm joined today by one bloke from one party that says he's offering just that. Richard Tice is leader of Reform UK, formerly the Brexit Party, as you'll all know, and he joins me now. Hello, Ticey, how are you doing?
I'm very well, Darren. Thank you very much. And yes, I absolutely believe that we at Reform UK, we are the alternative that people should take a serious look at, because we're the party of common sense, is how we like to put it.
Now, I wonder, before we get on to that then, about what the sort of common sense alternative is that you're offering, could you first of all just set out what you actually make of Sir Keir Starmer and of Boris Johnson?
Well, I mean, Keir Starmer's speech, 88 minutes long, and I can remember just one word. I mean, quite a good word, but just one word of it, Darren, which was his description of the Prime Minister as trivial. And actually, he was right on that. But the rest of it, I think, just reflects what he is, which is he's a diligent but dull lawyer.
Yeah.
And lawyers, they can argue both sides of a debate. They sit on the fence, a bit of this, a bit of that. He's not an inspirational leader that's going to motivate voters, motivate his activists. He's just, what you see is what you get, I'm afraid. Someone who, as you quite rightly said, actually wanted to deny the British people and many millions of Labour voters the possibility of actually leaving the European Union. And I don't think people will forget that in a very long time.
Yeah, exactly. And then as far as Boris Johnson's concerned, what is it that you actually make of him? Because I think, and I'm sure you're hearing this as well, mind, that a lot of people are very disappointed in Boris and feel like they put so much faith in him, right? To deliver Brexit, but not just that, to make the most of the opportunity of Brexit, Richard. And I'm afraid to say, I don't think he's doing that.
Well, it's a pretty strange place, isn't it, Darren, where neither Sir Keir Starmer, that I've just been talking about, nor Boris Johnson can admit that only women have a cervix.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
quite. Yeah.
the wokeness of those two is absurd. And I think that and, just drives millions of people absolutely bonkers. And look, Boris is a blustering, brilliant salesman. And we all love a salesman. We all love being pitched to. The problem is with good salesmen, they generally overpromise and underdeliver. And that is Boris all over. Yes, he can give a great after dinner speech, but it was lunchtime when he gave a speech. And his after dinner speech bore no relation whatsoever to the reality of the challenges facing everybody in the United Kingdom. And it's only October. We're not even in winter yet. And we can all see the challenges, staring us in the face. And Boris just acts as though there's no problem and it's all sunny uplands. And so, in a sense, yes, he got Brexit done. We said there are major problems with regard to Northern Ireland that they are working on. There are major problems with regard to fishing that they're not working on. But we have to now, if we're going to make progress and if we're going to use that advantage, then we've got to put the the foot flat on the accelerator. In fairness to the Prime Minister, actually, part of the freedom that Brexit gives us as a nation, he has utilised, for example, with this recent deal announced with the United States and Australia, what's called the AUKUS deal. That wouldn't have been possible, in my view, if we'd still been a member of the European Union. It wouldn't have been possible under Theresa May's version of a dodgy, woeful Brexit. So, we have got those freedoms, and now we've got to use them. And most importantly of all, we've got to use them here in the UK. In a sense, we are starting to see, well, we're seeing one of the early Brexit dividends, which is that wages for the least well off, the lowest paid, whether it's HGV drivers, factory workers, supermarket shelf stackers, they're seeing the greatest wage growth. And that's a good thing.
Yeah,
because they had wages suppressed for more than a decade or so. You and I campaigned on that. We know that was the truth, and the evidence is now there. So that's a good thing. But there's many other things where, frankly, people who thought that the Tory party stood for low taxes and smart regulation now realise that actually they've renamed themselves. I coined the word consocialist, Darren, and it's true. They stand for high tax, high regulation, nanny state. There's no difference between them and the Labour Party. The only difference is you have got an interesting after-dinner speaker leading them as opposed to a dull as ditchwater lawyer.
Yeah.
Apart from that, there's no difference.
Well, so you sort of highlight that by you mentioned it there, that comment, the very simple question, who is it that owns a cervix, that actually is born with a cervix? And both of them couldn't answer that question. You're right, Sir Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson were asked that question and refused to give an answer. Or rather, Sir Keir Starmer did give an answer, but it was to say, he wouldn't agree with that statement that women have a cervix. It's extraordinary. And I think a lot of people, Richard, are just saying, I want my politicians to be able to answer a bloody question. I want my politicians to be able to actually not deny biological truth and fact. Because actually, when you start to see women, frankly, erased from the national picture, the national conversation. And a lot of people are really worried about what this actually means as far as our political debate and discourse is concerned. Are you worried about that as well?
I'm desperately worried. I think you've hit it on the head there. And I was a bit slow to realise this, actually, Darren, I'll admit. But actually, biological women, are being massively demeaned and discriminated against by the absurdities of Sir Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson actually disrespecting them by not recognising that biological fact. And if they're not prepared to tell the truth on such a basic biological issue, then what does it say about all the other stuff that they tell voters and potential voters? I think it is really worrying. And, I just like to tell it as it is. And in the the proposals that we've got, the plans, the policies, the vision, we tell it as it is, the good, the bad and the ugly. We don't sugarcoat anything.
Yeah. And now you sort of touched on it there, but I wonder if as the economy is concerned, the overall picture, you're a businessman. This winter's going to be bloody hard for people, Richard, isn't it? This winter's going to be, you've got inflation, you've got sky-high energy bills, fuel, struggling to get fuel, all of these things. The picture is pretty depressing. Food prices are going to go up as well soon. And basically, we're looking at the overall picture. That's quite a depressing one for the consumer. But if you're a business owner, for example, and let's not forget that small to medium-sized enterprise, as you well know, is the backbone of the British economy. And I'm not confident that we're using the flexibility that Brexit gives us as best as we possibly could. Richard, could you just set out what reform would do differently and what you would have as part of your spending review?
So we stand for three simple things that I think will be what the next election is fought on, whenever it is, and we'll be standing 600 candidates, be under no doubt at all. We've got some 320 already. But we believe that actually, instead of raising taxes to the highest level for 70 years, like the Consocialists have done, we should be cutting taxes hard. I want to free up 6 million of the lowest paid from paying any income tax by lifting the income tax threshold from 12,500 to £20,000. That's almost £30 a week. That's real money to people on that sort of earning level. We want to free up over 1 million small businesses from paying any corporation tax up to 100 grand of profits. Again, that means that small businesses can invest more in new equipment, new people, new software to grow businesses. We want to abolish a raft of useless, unproductive taxes that actually hinder growth, because with higher growth, you get higher wages, and that's absolutely vital. And with higher wages, you actually get more tax revenues. So, we can afford this. The Tory plan is for austerity Mark 2. We tried austerity Mark 1 about 10 years ago. It was disastrous. So we've got to cut taxes, go for growth. The second thing we stand for, Darren, is zero waiting lists. We've all been brainwashed in this country to accept waiting lists of many months or years. Why? You don't have waiting lists in much of the rest of Europe. They literally look at us and laugh at us and think, what on earth are you folks doing? We don't need waiting lists. So we've got a bold plan involving putting the patient in charge, not the bureaucratic blob of the NHS. Of course, it'll always remain free at the point of delivery. But if you use a voucher system, you can transform the way that healthcare is delivered in this country, and we could have zero waiting lists within 18 months. And the third thing we stand for is with regard to energy prices. We've got a smart energy plan. The Tories' net zero plan is not net zero, it is net stupid. And it will send hundreds of thousands of decent British manufacturing jobs to China and elsewhere. It'll send hundreds of billions of pounds of all of our money to China and elsewhere. And it will cost every household in Britain hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of extra cash over and above the huge cost increases we've just seen at the moment. So we're just at the foothills of the mountain of net zero costs that this Tory government wants to impose on people. And let's be very clear, the reason for the mess we're currently in, these huge energy bill increases, which is leading through into food price inflation, is a decade of mismanagement. Because remember, when the Tories took power in 2010, we were a net exporter of energy. We are now a net importer of energy, and we are reliant on the goodwill and the charm of none other than Vladimir himself, Vladimir Putin, and Macron from France. You couldn't
Would you
make this
have
up.
banned fracking, Richard?
So we absolutely believe that, I call it the golden gas. Shale gas is literally the golden gas. It's in America, they use shale gas, and guess what? Their gas prices are about 1/5 of our gas prices. The Tory manifesto, I mean, these people cannot tell the truth. Their manifesto in 2017 said, we're going to have a great shale gas industry, thousands and thousands of jobs. It's the way forward. There's first sight of a couple of eco bullies and eco zealots, and the Tories bottle it. They run for the hills literally like cowards. It's pathetic. We've got all this gas. It's like literally having gold under your house and deciding that you're never going to use it. Instead, you're just going to leave it there and go. And so all we're doing instead is we're sending our money overseas for someone else's gas. That money never comes back to us. We've got the gas here. We should use it. Create jobs. You can access shale gas safely, easily, cheaply, and it would be a huge boon. So we should have shale gas. I'm a great believer in cutting emissions. It's an important part of, we all want cleaner air. We all care about the environment. But everybody must remember that the climate's been changing for thousands of years, and it will change for thousands more years. And it changes as a result of multiple factors, most of which we know very little about and we can't control. We can control emissions. It's right to reduce them. But yes, let's do it in a strategic, proportionate way that doesn't expose us to the whims of overseas rogue actors and rogue states and dictators, that doesn't end up with people being ripped off financially. And we can invest in technologies. And so, yes, let's invest in the latest small modular reactor type nuclear technologies. Let's invest in tidal power down in Swansea Bay. Let's invest. I would love to see 5 million plus homes with solar panels, but I want those panels, Darren, designed and manufactured here in the United Kingdom. they'll get more efficient, be fantastic. That's how you reduce energy costs for consumers, and it's how you get more jobs, proper green jobs, rather than sending them overseas.
Well, yeah. I mean, so are you effectively saying then that you guys are trying to do what some might argue UKIP did in being a sort of offering a Thatcherite alternative, if you allow me to say that, to the sort of bombastic Boris who seems to be a glorified social democrat these days?
In a sense, I don't want to be labelled like any historic economic theory. I actually consider ours is the common sense approach. So, for example, on utilities, I think it's wholly unacceptable that we've allowed the majority of all our public utilities to become owned by overseas investor. The biggest single investor group of our utilities is a Chinese billionaire and other Chinese investors. And they are making off like bandits. Huge returns every year, 20% on their money invested. UK pension funds would only expect 3 or 4%. So I think that we should, 50% of our utilities should be owned by UK pension funds with private sector management, and the other 50% of all our utilities should be nationalised, owned by us, the consumer, the taxpayer, and that way we can, again, we'll cut costs, we'll keep costs under control, and guess who benefits? The consumer, the British families, not Chinese billionaires. I just think that's wholly unacceptable. I think it's strategically foolish. I think it's financially ludicrous. And we're the only party who's just telling this as it is. You know, the United States don't allow overseas ownership of critical infrastructure. The French don't, and nor should we.
Are you a bit worried that what's missing from the from Reform UK, and I say this as someone who admires you greatly, Richard, and thinks you're great, but are you missing the sort of the sheer force behind the political heavyweight that is Nigel Farage?
Look, Nigel's pursuing his media career. He's been in politics for 30 years.
His show is great, isn't it?
It is, and his show is great. But the reality is, we've got to look forwards. We've got to move on. The policies we're coming up with, the policies to deal with the challenges of tomorrow, and I think they're relevant. And we're pushing them forward. And look, the thing is, if you want to win the lottery, you have got to buy a ticket. Now, I don't buy a ticket, so I don't expect to win it. But we do want to shape and influence the British political scene, and that's why we're going to be on, give or take, 600 ballot papers at the election, so that we can shape and influence. And democracy is much better off when voters have got more choice. We're the only party out of the 5 that stand pretty much everywhere. We're the only party that'll be campaigning to cut taxes. The only party that will be campaigning with a bold healthcare vision of zero waiting lists. And the only party with a sensible policy to reduce emissions whilst cutting energy costs for consumers. They're all achievable, but you've got to tell the truth. You've got to be completely candid with people about what works and what doesn't work. And I have a simple expression, Darren, which is we are an amazing nation, a great nation with a proud heritage. We love our culture. We love the British values. We've got so much to celebrate, but we're like lions and lionesses led by clueless donkeys who don't tell us the truth, and it's not good enough.
Are you worried then? Would you support? I think this was certainly the Brexit Party's position, certainly UKIP's position anyway, which was that first past the post denies people of the choice that you speak of. Are you supportive of proportional representation? Would you change the electoral system altogether? Yeah.
Of course, absolutely, because the truth is that first past the post is really unfair. It actually disenfranchises millions and millions and millions of voters in
What do you say to those, Richard, who say, oh, well, hang on a minute, because what that means is sort of what we see on the continent of Europe, which is unstable coalitions that don't actually deliver?
So we had a coalition between 2010 and 15. We had Theresa May's coalition and clueless government between 17 and 19. So, first past the post doesn't resolve that issue or at all. All it does is disenfranchise millions of voters. And the great thing about proportional representation is that every vote counts. Every vote makes a difference. It means it's fairer. You get new parties, disruptors coming in with new ideas, telling different, telling the truth in different ways. And in a sense, I think that's good. I think democracy is the winner. And I think more people would vote, more people would feel that their vote counts. Interesting, isn't it, Darren? The proof is when the referendum came along, everybody knew that their single vote was the same as anybody else's, and they all counted. And the turnout was huge. I think, in recollection, it was, it was about 75% or something. And so the proof's in the pudding. I think that proportional representation is fairer. I think you get more people engaged, and I think you get a better spread of different ideas and different policy ideas. And I think that's good for democracy. It's good for people.
Are you in conversation with any Conservative MPs? Are you trying to tempt people to join your cause?
Of course. I mean, it'd be great if we could, tempt a couple across. Look, there are some very unhappy Tory MPs, without question, who feel that the party has left them. But it's a huge step for someone to take. But I'd be delighted if 1, 2, or 10 said they've had enough. Be under no illusion. Rishi Sunak is about to deliver in a couple of weeks' time another budget. He'll try and disguise it, but that will be a tax-raising budget, and there'll be more taxes that will be lifted before the general election. Because what they've just recently done with this huge tax hike, it's the biggest tax hike in 60 or 70 years, is they're pouring money. They pretended it's going to social care. Almost none of it's going to social care. It's all going into the top of the huge bureaucratic blob of the NHS. And I don't think social care will see any of it. And I think they'll be back. Because they're not going to reform the NHS. They're not going to reform the way healthcare is delivered in this great country of ours. It'll just get soaked up. The same week they announced that tax rise, you had, I think about 40 jobs in the NHS, managerial jobs, earning $250,000 a year. I mean, I think you and I probably we all applied,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, do you think then that ultimately people being a bit unhappy, as you mentioned, you're speaking to people who are telling you that, this government has lost its way. But hasn't he, Boris Johnson, hasn't he shown that big spending commitments and higher taxes are electorally successful?
Well, I don't think he has actually, because he didn't come into power in 2019 on a platform of raising taxes and more regulations and an authoritarian police state. He came in to get Brexit done. He got that done with some imperfections, but he doesn't stand for what traditional conservative voters believe in. And I don't think the polls reflect the reality of people's concerns on the ground. And of course, in a sense, the time to see really is the next general election. I'm pretty sceptical of a lot of these polls at the moment, Darren. If you look at the evidence, for example, just recently, I know very specifically, but about vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds that requires parental consent. Well, guess what? Totally contrary to the polls that were released at the time that the government and the health secretary and the Nadeem Tahawi, when they ignored the JCVI advice, they overruled their advice. The polls showed that many parents would be thrilled. Well, actually, less than 12% of them have consented to their children to be vaccinated. So I don't trust the polls in many issues, and I think let's see. But we do face a winter of big challenges, potentially a winter of discontent. The unions starting to flex their muscles, and I think the political scene could be in a interesting place in 12 months' time. Things are strange when, having said what I just said about polls, where there was another poll that said people were beginning to think that maybe the Labour was the party of lower taxation than the Tories. I mean,
well, absolutely.
You basically know something's gone badly wrong in the world when that happens.
You stood in Hartlepool, didn't you? Yeah.
I did indeed, yes, in 2019.
Yeah. There's a patronising view that, as you know, I'm here in County Durham, but there's a patronising view that sort of says that what red wall, and I don't really like that phrase, but what red wall voters want is higher taxes and bigger spending. Actually, Richard, I think people up here would be absolutely delighted if government would get off their back and just leave them alone. I think there is a sort of, what the main two political parties seem to view themselves as is glorified social care workers. that are going to look after and sort of they romanticise the working class. And it really is just patronising guff, essentially.
I was complete patronising guff, and I had a wonderful time standing in Hartlepool. We knocked on over 40,000 doors, and I learned a huge amount. And there's no question that people do want the government off their back. They just want to be allowed to get on with their lives, but to have a decent chance.
Yeah.
And there are, there's some good things happening in the Teesside area around Hartlepool with the Freeport and such like. And actually, there is a really good mayor there, Ben Houchen, who's doing a great job. So, there's some positives. But no, I think what I do know is that many Red Wall Tory MPs are actually really fearful about the impact that We're Reform UK could have, because they know that actually we just tell it as it is. We're talking about some common sense. And I think that, I always like to trust the people, trust the voters. And, the good people in many of those traditionally Labour-held seats, in the industrial heartlands, great heartlands of our country, they've lent their vote to the Tories. I think many of them could lend their vote to us at Reform UK. I think people are not very happy. No one likes their taxes going up, for public services to get worse. I mean, when people start to try and see their GP and find they can't, and they realise they've got to wait 6 months, to get the pain gone, whether it's a hip replacement or something else. And friends of theirs are dying decades early of cancer because they weren't able to get some cancer treatment during the lockdowns. I think people will draw their own conclusions and say, actually, it's time for change.
Yeah. I mean, just finally then, Richard, I think it's really depressing, the scenes. If you turn on the news, the scenes that you'll be met with at the minute, unless you turn on Sky News, which is basically just a glorified climate change channel, it's Greta Thunberg TV. But if you turn on a news channel which isn't so focused on that issue, you'll see insulate or insult Britain on there, standing in front of some of our busiest roads in the country, denying working people from being able to make an honest living, denying mothers getting to school, denying even people getting to hospitals, Richard. But the government, on everything from Insult Britain to the English Channel, they don't seem to be able to get a grip of law and order. Just how serious do you think that is?
It's really serious, and it's just a reinforcement that the government, they talk a great game, whether it's Boris with his blustering salesmanship, whether it's Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, with her robust, reassuring words that count for nothing. Because under their leadership, the truth is that crime figures are getting worse and worse. Only about 7% of all offences now result in someone being charged. That is disgraceful. Illegal immigration coming across the channel has soared in the last 12 months. It's now approaching 20,000, well over double last year's number. It's quite obvious what needs to be done. And we at Reform UK, I've got a very simple view on this. We've got zero tolerance on crime, zero tolerance on antisocial behaviour, and we should have zero tolerance on illegal immigration. Of course, let's welcome smart, lawful immigration, as I think we always have, as a hospitable nation, where it works for our economy, where we've got skill shortages, then let's welcome that. But let's train our own people. Let's skill up our own school leavers. Let's invest in young British people. And that's the role of big business. And in terms of the policing, there is an utter failure of police leadership up and down the country, whether it's the Metropolitan Police in London, whether it's Greater Manchester Police in special measures in the north. It's just not good enough. It's just not good enough, Darren.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Cressida Dick, just on that, do you think Cressida Dick should go?
I've been calling for her to resign ever since the appallingly managed vigil following the tragic murder of Sarah Everard. And the really inspirational, motivational reason that the Home Secretary gave for unbelievably reappointing Cressida Dick was continuity. What, really? Continuity of failure? Continuity of cover-up? Continuity of police officers clearly having some form of misogynistic banter that everybody's known about within the police for ages. The truth's coming out now, and I have to say, it's not. It really is not a pretty picture. And I think that police forces up and down the country need a radical overhaul of leadership. I think we've got to bring in people from the forces, colonels, brigadiers, generals, brilliant people, strong leaders who get stuff done, who don't take any nonsense, no nonsense at all, doers, achievers. And I think, we need a root and branch reform of the way our police works. Again, I want to be ambitious. I want 50% of offences being charged, not 7. It's hopeless.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I think you've given us a lot to be... it's really thoughtful and considered, the way in which I think you approach the very many, unfortunately, crises that this country faces at the minute. And this, as I say, this is going to be a really difficult winter for people. And I think it's about time we actually started having the sort of conversations that you want to have. So thank you very much for doing it, essentially.
Thank you for the interview, and to your listeners and viewers, thank you for watching and thinking about Reform UK. It's time to send the government a message, a clear message. I think people want reform.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for listening, for watching. And please do consider hitting that little subscribe button there and the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any future content. I'll put a link to the Reform UK website in the description if you want to find out more about the party. Cheers for watching. Thank you so much for watching this video. Reasoned is a grassroots organisation that's entirely funded by people like yourself. So if you're in a position to do so, please do consider supporting us by clicking the link to the side there.